What's poppin'? What's cracking? What's going on? What's up? I want to talk about. Actually, I wanted to talk about a couple of things. I tried to talk about, morality in regards to homosexuality and in regards to how we deal with transgenders individuals. Spoiler alert: I'm a lefty, so you could just kind of assume. Actually, probably don't just assume opinions, because you might assume a lot of fucked up shit that I don't think is true. But I'm an ally. Generally, it's everybody in the LGBTQ plus, QIA plus community. I guess if I just said LGBT plus, that should include everyone, right? Yeah. I wanted to talk about that for a second. I think a lot of my stuff is talking about the morality of it. I want to talk about it in the black community or whatnot, but I think it might be useful to build out my ideas on what is and isn't moral, or what morality means first, then do another video, and then I could refer somebody back to this video if they're questioning what I think about morality. This is a more broad topic, which means less views, whatever. Yeah, this channel isn't about views or subscribers. It's about ideas and conversations, right? Which is what I tell myself as I continue not to get more views and subscribers. Let's talk about morality. So, I don't think objective morality exists. Now, a lot of people are probably going to be like, okay, well then you can't talk about these things. If you don't have an objective standard for morality, then you can't even really talk about morality, because then it's just your opinion. And of course, imaginary straw man, you would say something like that, because you're an imaginary straw man. So to say that objective morality doesn't exist, my one argument is, both of us have the same ability to talk about objective morality. If you think objective morality does exist, you're wrong. Okay, so I have to figure out, why are you wrong? So for one, to define what morality is, it specifically means whether something being good or bad, right? If something is moral, generally using the short and saying, is that something we ought to do? Is it a good thing to do? Should we do it? Is it good that we have done it or that we will do it? Is it immoral? Something we ought not to do, something we shouldn't do, right? So that's, that seems fair enough. I think we're all agreed there, right? Now, that, in my opinion, even at that point, that implies subjectivity. Because how do you know whether you should or should not do something? For one, it's different types of subjectivity we're going to talk about. It's based on the situation and context, right? I got to think of something really random. Should I punch people in the face, right? Just general. Should I just punch people in the face? I think a lot of people would say, no, I shouldn't just punch people in the face. That's going to depend on the people, why and what, right? I shouldn't, if you just say in general, no, you shouldn't punch people in the face. I'm like, okay, cool. But what if this person is someone who is attacking a child, right? And me punching this person in the face stops them from doing that. Now you could say, well, find another way to stop them. Get in front of them, block them, turn the other cheek, grab them, call the cops, right? A lot of other people are going to say, okay, well, if this person's hurting a child, then you should punch them in the face. Maybe we should ratchet it up, like gun-related issues, right? You guys love gun stuff. It's really, people all have the same exact opinion on gun stuff, so I think that makes this very easy. If someone's in my house, right, and they've broken into my house already, they've got a gun, and they're about to shoot my wife and kids, is it immoral that I shoot them back, right? Especially some of these moral actions, if we think that it's more important that my wife and kids are allowed to live than this person is allowed to live, then it is moral that I shoot them? Or is it, since it's immoral that I kill or harm others, I have to allow others to harm me? Is that the case? I would argue, based on my subjective morality, for one, I think subjectively, you should be able to defend innocent lives, right? My kids haven't done anything to anybody. This person has trying to cause harm to others. By doing that, you have decreased your worth in my eyes, not by some objective standard, because I don't think that exists, but in my eyes, your life now has less value than my kid's life. I probably already had less value. Of course, I personally care about my wife and kids more than a random person who's broken into my home, but maybe I didn't value it little enough to kill them just for breaking into my home. Maybe if they were just stealing shit, let them go. If we're trying to kill somebody that's important to me, I'm gonna kill them, right? So look, that's an example of a situation where subjectively, I think they've now lowered their value, life, right? Can there be an objective way to look at that situation? Like, I'm trying to work through this right now with y'all. I didn't write a script. I don't like to write scripts. Attention span's way too bad for that. I'm trying to work through it right now. Trying to see, is there an objective way to handle that idea? I'm sure somebody in the comments would be like, no, objectively, you have the right to defend someone's life. I'm like, okay, but the question isn't right, do I objectively have the right to defend someone's life? Is it objectively good or bad to kill, right? Okay, well, like, that, I guess the potential counter is there aren't objective standards for every single action or every single thing. There are specific things that can be objective. But then my next thing is, well, then it's subjective which things are objective or not, right? Okay, because I could just add more layers of complication to it. Eventually this hypothetical gets to the point where it's almost never going to happen. And I understand that. But the point of hypotheticals isn't whether this will or will not happen. It's to test the decision making or the ideals that you're trying to map on reality, right? So like say this person who came into my house is trying to kill my wife and kids because my wife and kids are supervillains and they're going to blow up an orphanage if they're not stopped. It's a little silly, yes, this example. I guess blowing up orphanages isn't silly, but the idea that my wife and kids are doing that. So now, it's moral for this guy, if again, if we decided that ending other lives is what's moral, it's moral for this guy to end my wife and kids' life. And now it's immoral for me to end his life because he's doing a moral action, right? Just adding more layers of complication to it. And I think the only way to this mass out into reality is relationships and situations are so interpersonally connected, right? Like you could talk about even, is it moral to shop at like Walmart or Amazon because of the nature of how they, like you shop at Amazon, you give them, more means and more power to lobby and prevent people from unionizing, stopping them from, this is if you think unions are a good thing, we'll get into that later, and stopping them from supporting workers' rights, or you're buying products from a company that's doing what people call slave wages, which I find slave wages weird because for black slaves, there wasn't wages, right? That's another point, another topic. You're supporting companies that are causing some form of harm, but then economists also like to argue, well, if there weren't these abusive companies in these systems, there wouldn't be any companies in these systems. An abusive company giving pay is better than no pay, is the argument, right? But based on that same idea, we said like, okay, well, child workers, which we used to have in America a while ago, but now we don't, like, children working is abusive, right? But it was like, okay, well, in those countries, if children aren't working, then nobody's working, is their argument. I'm like, well, then is it immoral to have children work because they're being abused? Or is it immoral to stop them from feeding themselves and their families, right? I'm trying to give things that have complicated answers, obviously, because I'm like, based on certain other values we're adding. So like, the point is, we're already 8 minutes. What's subjective in this point of it is, we're based on the situation, right? That's what's subjective. Now we have to add another layer to it, like the subject who is deciding, that being it. Because based on the situation is how each individual is determining whether something is right or wrong. You may have had a concrete answer to all of those hypotheticals. That's completely fine. The point is, everyone's going to have a different one. Likely, you might have had a different, answer or solution than I have to them. But the thing is, you're going to have a different one based on our situation. So, we got to talk about God. We have to. That's kind of part of this. It comes up. A lot of things. I have to do a video talking about why I'm an atheist at a certain point. A lot of things end up coming back to God, and me not being religious does influence. I like to say it influences my opinions. It influences my opinions based on the idea of someone who is religious. I think being religious influences your opinions. I think not being religious can't influence your opinions unless you're just saying influence is the act of not being influenced. Well, you're saying the act of not being influenced is an influence, right? So I'm not using atheism to guide my actions. That doesn't make sense. The idea that there isn't a God isn't why I do certain things. It's more like there's just not things that I'm doing because of the idea that there is a God. People are gonna just say that's the same thing. It doesn't matter for now. We'll talk about that later. So, people like to talk about atheists have no morals or have no grounding for their morals, no objective grounding for their morals. For one, because we say it, that objective morals don't exist. That's a good first reason to assume that we don't have an objective grounding, because most of us say that there isn't a such thing. But most of us argue that they're also wrong. Even if your morals are based on what God says is true, then you're leaning on, okay, well, my morals are absolute because God said it and God is absolute. Problematically though, God is still a subject. It's just God's subjective moral opinion. Even if God is some all-powerful being, even if I granted that God would exist, it would still be subjective. Due to God's ideas. That I have to find a better way to frame this, right? A better way to work this out. Because the immediate thing I was going to say, well, that God's a subject, God says something is true, but that's still just God's subjective opinion. Like other subjects don't have the immediate same subjective opinion as him. For one, opinions wouldn't have to exist. Even God wouldn't be able to have opinions for things to be objective. We would all just morals. I don't think morals would exist necessarily. By the beginning stuff that we worked out, right? We already said that something, whether you ought to or ought not to do something, and again, we also have to work in, it's based on in a certain situation, or even if the certain situation is you are an alive being. But even all situations are subjective, right? So even God being a subject deciding which subjective situations you should or shouldn't do something. I think the problem is, maybe I don't understand how objective morality can exist, right? I mean, I've heard people try and talk about it. It's never quite made sense. Usually it just seems to lean on, from what I've heard, I'm not going to say this is what all Christians say. And again, I like to talk about Christians because that's who I've dealt with. People who practice other religions. Of Abrahamic faiths, a lot of them tend to deal the same way with this. Other religions, I don't know enough about you to make any claims. So I'm not talking about you guys. If you want to bring up something, I can talk about that right in the comments. But it seems to lead on the majesty of, majesty is not a good word, how powerful God is essentially, right? Because he knows everything and controls everything. If he says something's objective, then it necessarily is subjective. If something's objective, then it necessarily is subjective. But I don't think even that can make sense, right? Because if it's subjectively true, then it's true. No, let's not say it's true. A question that I've heard atheists propose as a rebuttal to this is, maybe it's not a rebuttal, but if it's objectively true, then it's true regardless of even God's opinion on it, right? Or is it that there is no opinion on it? This is the case, and this is what God knows is the case. Not thinks is the case, he knows is the case, right? Trying to find a way to build it so that it makes sense from a Christian perspective. But from an atheist, the atheist idea is like, look, something is true, so even if God said said otherwise, God would be wrong, right? This is always true. It's like if God could, I guess their argument would be God couldn't have a different opinion. Right? God necessarily could not have a different opinion than this, because God knows everything, but God knows everything that is correct, and what is correct is that these morals exist, right? The question is, did God make these morals true? Did God make these morals true and then okay, I think here's one issue I'm having. I think I'm baking in my memory of the fact that God changed his mind in the Bible, and I think that's making me have a hard time with the idea. Like, very simply, New Testament, Old Testament, there are different rules. The New Covenant, there are simply new rules in the New Testament than there were during the times of the Old Testament. Or even in the Old Testament itself, right? Noah's flood, it's like everyone's become in such a way that he's going to make it rain for 40 days and 40 nights and wipe all life off of the earth. It's what is said in the New King James Version of the Bible. But after that happened, seeing what he's done, he decided that he'll never do that again. Like, So he changes his mind, or he does something that he says is a good idea or is a bad idea. It's not like he said, it is objectively moral for me to wipe all life off of the earth, but he does change his mind, right? Or at least, and that seems strange for someone that always knows what the right action is. Like, it doesn't seem to, I think the issue is it doesn't make sense with someone that already knows everything to have changed their mind and to work that in with God. So maybe, I want to get past that point though. If I even grant, what do I even grant? Even like, you know, there's sacrifices with animals that were done that were no longer being done. So like, even killing being wrong, right? Well, God can say like, thou shalt not kill, right? That's a rule that we generally have, a freaking commandment. But even though God's directly requested the murder of people, so in different situations, even God thinks it's okay or not okay to kill. Even when we talk about abortion, right? I said abortion instead of abortion. Like, for one, God's ordered the murdering of children. I think there's a story where it specifically said babies. I'm not going to say that specifically. But murder the woman and children has been direct commands from God. So, murdering, even based on your prime being, like, he's changed his mind from time to time, or made exceptions, meaning in a specific situations, like we were just talking about, in certain situations, actually this is okay. Even though it's not like, okay, well, because of this new context, like, it's just because, oh no, I'm saying it's okay right now. And then you could imply that, okay, well, it's because of the context. But if you imply it's because of the context, then you are then saying that it's subjective. There's going to be it's going to be like probably a few angry Christians in these comments because of my butchering of memory of the situation, for one, butchering of understanding, apparently. And for one, we're at 17 minutes, we're going to wrap this up. I want to have an actual conversation, if you got this far, I want to have an actual conversation with someone who thinks objective morality exists. It would be cool to talk to an atheist that thinks objective morality exists, a Christian who thinks subjective morality is all that exists, and a Christian that thinks subjective morality, or any religious individual. I want people that disagree with me. I want to have a conversation. I mean, it's fun for me to ramble and talk, but again, it's really hard to steelman an idea that I don't hold. Right? It's true. Like, I'm going to be missing certain things. I simply am. And sure, you guys are going to let me know you're missing. Let me know in the comments. For now, I can respond in the comments to things I was missing and try and address it in a second video. Again, I'd love if anybody would want to do like a Zoom or a Discord call conversation. I want to start this up so that I'm having conversations with people who disagree with me. Because the goal is also, I want to understand what you guys are talking about. I want to know where you're coming from. I can think by myself for a while. I can read a bunch of philosophy books, but even again, while I'm reading somebody's own thing, while I'm listening to a video of someone talk about something, there's going to be a lot of times where, unbeknownst to me, I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense because of this. I might devalue something. And because they're not having a conversation with me, like, I can ask you a question about something that I don't think makes sense, and then you can maybe or you can at least argue it to me, even if I don't change my mind immediately. I think there's a lot of value to potentially talking to a person instead of talking to a camera and then you guys talking back at that. At the very least, comment what you disagree. I guess we're done. If you liked what you saw, leave a like, do subscribe, do a crime. Just kidding, don't do a crime. I'm out.